This is the Collaboration Dynamics Podcast, helping you work together better with Judy Rees, X-Ray listener, best-selling author, international virtual collaboration trainer, and master of metaphor. Hear more at xraylistening.com.
Hello and welcome to Collaboration Dynamics. With me today is Greg Orme, the author of The Spark, How to Ignite and Lead Business Creativity, published by FT Publishing. And Greg is an old friend of mine, someone I used to work with many years ago. And Greg, why don't you introduce yourself and say something about what you are doing nowadays?
Thanks, Judy. Yes, well, I'm a specialist in leadership development and organisational change, and so I work with lots of different organisations, and also through London Business School as a programme director. And I've got a specialism within that I particularly work with a lot of businesses that seek to be innovative and creative. And along with that, I've just written a book called The Spark, How to Ignite and Lead Business Creativity by FT Publishing.
Excellent, thank you. And, well, I start all these interviews with a similar question. When you are collaborating at your best, you are like what?
It's a really interesting question. I think it's interesting. I write in the book about a very, very unique organisation, the CERN, who run the Large Hadron Collider. Mm-hmm. The first thing that comes to mind is I'm like, maybe sounds a bit grandiose, but it's not meant to be, like the Large Hadron Collider, mm-hmm. because that they send electrons around that huge circuit and they collide with other electrons, but the explosion is sort of captured within that. So when you're with someone, I think what you're seeking to do is for that person to be firing their thoughts and ideas at you, and you to be sort of responding with your thoughts and ideas. And when true collaboration that results in creativity happens, is I think some kind of serendipitous collision of two thoughts, two ideas, and they come together and they create something new and exciting. And that's, I think, obviously a lot of individual creativity comes from just lone people thinking on their own. But when two people or more than two people come together and collaborate, I think that's the metaphor or the image that comes to mind for me.
That's very interesting, because you in that metaphor, you've got the ideas being fired off, and the sense of the explosion being captured. Is there anything else about how it's captured when you are collaborating at your best?
Well, it's interesting, the question, because you're talking about me collaborating. I think I always think, obviously, collaboration implies someone else. So I think it depends on both of our attitudes. We've got to bring an attitude in which we support each other in taking a few risks in the conversation, and then support any little sparks that come out of it, and see where that allows us to go. And that requires two people not to sort of squash each other's ideas, but to support them, to allow kind of the capture of two people's ideas together to continue without being squashed.
Mm. And so when you're like the Large Hadron Collider, is that you, or you and the person or people you are collaborating with being like the Large Hadron Collider?
Yeah, I think it's a metaphor that encapsulates being with someone else, not just me. Mm-hmm. So, I'm in there, but I've also included in that image the other people that I'm collaborating with.
Mm. And when it's like that, and you're in there and the others are included, whereabouts are you in the Large Hadron Collider?
Well, I think, it's difficult to say. Obviously, if you take it too far, but we are in the loop. In that large loop in the centre of it. yeah, I think you've both gone into a space in which you're happy and willing to sort of expose yourself and take some risks and be part of something together. I think, what kills collaboration would be if you weren't both in that loop together. If there was some kind of barrier between you, or you weren't on an equal footing and sort of respecting each other's ideas and wanting to make that connection, as that metaphor implies.
So when you and the other people are both in the loop like that, and it's about the collision of ideas, what needs to happen for that kind of collision of ideas?
Well, I think you don't need a prescription for what, the objective is, an absolute destination, but you need a shared vision of the issue or the problem or the kind of brief criteria that you're working in. So you both are working along the same lines to something. It's not completely prescriptive, but there's a shared vision of where you're going together. And you need to both sort of, and I'm just talking about two people here to keep it a bit more simple, but you both need to have signed up to a similar set of values about how this conversation, this collaboration works.
Mm-hmm. And where could a set of values like that come from?
Where do people's values come from? They come from how they've been brought up, how they've worked successfully with others, whether collaboration has worked for them in the past. So I think some people are naturally collaborative, others are not. But I think there are sort of set of universal values to making collaboration work, of respecting each other's ideas, of listening very closely to the other person, of trying to build on their ideas and thoughts rather than tearing them down initially, of trying to be helpful and supportive of each other's thinking.
Mm-hmm. The reason I ask that is that some people might say, well, the values have to come from the individuals. Other people might be saying, well, it's about the environment, the context. Someone from outside the individuals involved might be setting the rules or the values.
Yes, and I think that's absolutely right. And so if we're talking about collaboration in the workplace, this is particularly important because we're now talking about whether the organisation, the team, that part of the culture actually supports collaboration or has attitudes and policies and philosophies in place which get in the way of that, which sadly a lot of organisations have, whether they mean to or not.
Mm-hmm. So when the organisation supports collaboration, I suppose the next question is, that's like what? What's the organisation doing? Mm-hmm. Either what's the organisation, or is there a nice metaphor for that? I love the Large Hadron Collider, so I'm wondering what's next.
Well, I think a metaphor that I use in The Spark, my book, to describe a creative culture, which I think if you call it creative culture, by definition, I think if an organisation is creative, it's also collaborative. Have you ever been to Cornwall and gone to those, what are those domes called in Cornwall that have all the hothouse flowers inside?
Eden Project.
The Eden Project. I think of a creative or collaborative culture within an organisation being a little bit like the Eden Project, because when you go to Cornwall, even in July, it can be quite nippy outside. But if you go in those domes, all sorts of different plants and flowers can grow from anywhere in the world. And that's what an organisation needs to do to protect and preserve creativity and collaboration. It needs to create a space in which there's permission to do it. There's permission to take risks. There's permission to share with each other. And that's about all the different things that organisations do to create that culture.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting on a number of levels. So the Eden Project, you say it's quite nippy outside, but you go in and it's warm. Is there anything else about how the organisation creates that kind of warmth for creativity and collaboration?
Well, I always think of it as two major themes that organisations do, which is they consciously try and remove some of the obvious barriers to this moment when two ideas collide, two people's attitudes, and they come from different ways, collide and create something new. So they demolish the idea barriers that might stand in the way of it happening. So there's a number of things in there. And then once you've got an environment in which some of the obvious barriers have been deconstructed, then they encourage that serendipitous moment when people can come together, whether it be formal meetings or just less formal things, sort of more day-to-day sharing of knowledge and ideas and thoughts.
Mm-hmm. So, that's interesting. So, formal meetings can be creative.
But I think the word formal has taken us down a slightly wrong route there. But I think meetings can be creative. But the sad thing is they so often aren't. But when I work with businesses, I try and make sure that they think of meetings in many different ways, because if you want highly productive meetings, you can actually start putting things in place like agendas and ensuring people keep to the point and prepare for it, and do all the good things that actually make productive, highly focused meetings, work and have an outcome, and then have some actions with names against them and dates and all that good stuff, sort of project planning type stuff. Mm-hmm. But also, if you want highly creative and collaborative meetings, it's a slightly different feel. Again, you can go in with a brief, but the construction of the meeting in terms of the people that are there, the way it's facilitated by the person who's got the sort of the greatest hierarchical advantage, the biggest manager, the biggest leader in there is different. So there's sort of a creative, or as the phrase goes, a blue skies meeting is a bit different, and there's a set of rules or a set of guidelines for how to encourage those meetings to come out with something creative from people's collaboration in them.
Mm-hmm. I was reading some stuff by two authors completely independently came up with the same thing about the shape of meetings. Nick Udall and Caitlin Walker both talk about, or both draw, either fan-shaped meetings or star-shaped meetings. The fan-shaped is more of a sort of one person broadcasting to the others, whereas the star shape, everybody is talking to everybody else. That's the sort of the metaphor that they use for it, but the same idea, I think, that basically there are different structures depending on the kind of meeting you want to actually have.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think there's a good sort of metaphors to understand it, because I think that the problem with organisational meetings is they reflect a prevailing organisational culture, which is we still, many businesses still have a command and control, quite hierarchical structure to the business, in which big leaders tell middle-sized leaders and who tell everybody else what to do. For a highly creative or collaborative meeting, you want more of the star shape, with the leader just facilitating the discussion, so ensuring that everybody has a say. And importantly, I think the research really backs this up, that different backgrounds and approaches and age ranges and ethnicities and all sorts of things are brought into that meeting, because you get much more creative outputs when you get a lot more diversity of opinion in a meeting. That can be crushed immediately by somebody dictating their own ideas to everyone else. And of course, a creative organisation isn't going to remain very creative if the person running it or the board running it think they have to come up with all the good ideas.
Mm-hmm. That book by Cass Sunstein about groupthink, I think it's called Wiser, he talks about how if the leader speaks first and gives a definitive opinion, it pretty much automatically stifles the rest of the discussion.
Absolutely. And this is where, the most commonly used sort of creative tool in business is the brainstorm, isn't it? And most people have taken part in a brainstorm, whether it's been done skillfully or not. The interesting thing is that actually brainstorming is proven not to work that well, even because it's been going sort of for about 50 years since it was invented in the late 40s. Because even with a brainstorm, even if you take out the hierarchy and that idea of someone imposing their views on everyone else, what happens is human beings tend to go towards the loudest voice. So you immediately lose lots of ideas. So when I still encourage my clients to brainstorm in order to collaborate and have creative meetings, but actually the better way is to get everybody to actually have a think individually, bring their own ideas in, which have been written down and they've thought about, and then have a brainstorm. And I talked to a good friend of mine who's the deputy chairman of Saatchi & Saatchi, helped me with the book, Richard Heitner, and he says he uses those with the Saatchi & Saatchi clients as well, and it's all down to the skill of the collaborator in order to create what I call in my book electric conversations, which are playful. They are, they're without fear. They're based on ideas, not hierarchies. And this atmosphere, this this small kind of little culture that can be created in the meeting by the leader and then supported by everybody else.
Mm-hmm. And then you end up with an organisation like the Eden Project.
Yes, I was struggling to remember the. That's right. You've got a little Eden project, or if you do that a lot, and there's obviously a much wider range of things you need to do in the organisation as a whole. You can have a bubble of creativity in your organisation, because I don't think it naturally comes in the pretty competitive. Everything's got to be in a hurry business world. You actually have to invest in time and effort and space and resources to create these moments in the business day.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So a bubble of creativity. A lot of people listening to this might think, "Oh, I would love to work in a bubble of creativity. I'd love to be collaborating and working creatively with my colleagues, but I'm not the boss. Somebody above me is always going to stamp on creativity." Is it possible to create a bubble of creativity from halfway up the organisation?
It's a really good question, and a lot of the work I do is with people just below board level, or in the upper reaches of middle management, as well as working with boards occasionally. And there's a real tension there if that is the case. It's interesting because a lot of leadership development interventions happen at that level because they've been funded by the board. And this is often something that's said, which is, you bring in these great ideas about empowering people and about flattening hierarchy and about the importance of ideas. But as soon as I do that, then there's a big say-do gap between my activities and the board. So I think the answer is yes, it's possible. It's more difficult. I've worked with a lot of operating companies and also departments or units within businesses that have created their own microclimate, if you like, in which they may be a branding department or a marketing department, and creativity is absolutely vital to them, or they just may be a department that wanted to be more creative in its own right. So this is possible, but it puts a greater onus on the leader, I think, or the management team, to protect those people from a more hostile environment. But don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating, art here. This isn't about art and pure creativity. This is about creativity and collaboration in the pursuit of business goals, in the pursuit of profit and revenues. But the interesting counterintuitive thing about creativity, even within a business context, is the rules of management are rather subverted at times. The rules of hierarchy, the rules of various strategies and policies that you have to change.
Mm-hmm. So if someone wanted to do that, to just start to build out a little tiny microclimate from their desk halfway up the organisation, what kind of things would you suggest they did?
Well, I think, start small. Start with small things, which is maybe have a space. We were talking about serendipity earlier. A great example of a physical space in which people can meet is the Pixar HQ, which was actually designed by Steve Jobs when he was part of that business, in which everybody in the business is kind of forced to funnel into this big atrium in the middle of the building, and there's moments where everybody meets because they're forced to mingle. Now, of course, everybody can't afford to fund a massive building like that, but just allowing people time and space to get together. I worked with a business once where they just used to have afternoon tea on a Thursday afternoon in an open office space, and got all the departments to meet, because the death of creativity is silos and people hoarding their information, hoarding their knowledge, hoarding their ideas. So bringing people together so there's chance for them to meet and share their knowledge, trying to create space in meetings like we've just discussed, where everybody signs up to a kind of rules of engagement that leads to a more open, exciting, passionate discussion about, what if we did this? Some of the obviously I can't go into great detail about all the different things, but we're talking about there's Pixar also have a thing called the yes and response to people's ideas. So if someone comes up with an idea, certainly in the earlier part of a brainstorm, saying yes and we could do that with that, rather than the traditional business response is no but we've tried that, no but that won't get funded, no but the clients won't have that. So trying not to trample on ideas as they're happening, allowing them to develop in a kind of a divergent way before we get to the point where we actually have to sort of sift the ideas to see which ones are actually implementable.
I think it's in your book that this distinction between divergent and convergent moments in the creative process, that there's a place for gathering more and more and more ideas and a place for narrowing down.
Yes,
and it's common to design thinking, it's common to the Nick Udel's creative roller coaster. All of these processes all have that same pattern. First diverge, then converge.
Absolutely. And I think that the idea of that, if you think about sort of a triangle going out, expanding, and then a line, and then another triangle coming to a point, the difficulty of that is that doesn't really match business thinking, which is rather more linear. We start with a goal and then work back from that. How do we get there? It also puts quite a lot of stresses and strains on the manager, because there's not one set of rules. They sort of have to change halfway through that process. Mm-hmm. So in the early part of the divergent process, it's holding on the person who's facilitating the meeting to try and encouraging this yes and approach, and hear everybody's ideas and encourage everybody to take a few risks. That person or that group of people then have to change their mindset to work out, what have we got here? What did we actually produce? And then actually you have to be rather ruthless. I think creative environments aren't all cuddly and every idea gets supported. True creative leaders and true creative teams can say, actually, those just aren't good enough. They're really poor ideas. We're going to kill all those and we're just going to concentrate on this one over there. So there's a flexibility of mindset within the leadership team and also within the whole organization. I call it the yin and yang of creative businesses, that they're never one thing or another. They're both fun and serious. They are divergent and convergent. They offer space for collaboration and creativity, but also understand deadlines and delivering for clients. And so this yin and yang, this balance, is the constant thing that that the leaders have to cope with.
Mm-hmm. And just as in the Eden Project, people can't just keep on planting things. They have to prune and they have to weed and they have to decide which plants are going to stay.
Yeah, and another counterintuitive thing about creative businesses is just that they have discipline, they focus, and they have process as well. So there is a creative process, which that divergent and convergent thinking is at the heart of. An understanding as a management team where you are in the creative process and when you should step forward and when you should really step back and allow people time to experiment and play and use all those subconscious allow those subconscious ideas to come through, is a real talent and a skill. But if you're a bit more aware of it, it is possible to get better at it.
Mm-hmm. And that's where I'm going to guess you come in. So if people want to find out more about you, about your book, about your stuff and the work you do, how do they find you?
Well, if they put Greg Orme, Gregorme, The Spark into Google, I think that normally takes you to my page. If not, if you put in gregorme.org, that'll bring you to my page. And you can see more about my work with organizations and leaders as a coach and as a consultant.
And is there anything else that I should have asked you and didn't?
Well, there's lots to this, but I think we covered the main things, which is, for organizational creativity, the two main themes are: over time, your business will have put various rules and policies in place, which would seem quite sensible at the time, in order to make the place run better. Which of those are actually standing in the way of people wanting to come together and collaborate and share ideas? Which have created barriers? And then there are other things, and this is really towards the attitude of leaders and management teams. How can we encourage people to want to come to work and take a risk in this business, to collaborate, to give some of themselves away? And that's about actually leading, facilitating culture. If we can keep those two themes in mind, it can get quite complicated within them, but those are the two things I think really can make a big difference to a business.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for all of that. Lots to mull over and think about and apply. And thank you.
Well, thanks, Judy. Nice to speak to you.